Everything? Cool. instruction that came from David Makhura's office that 6 companies should be given special treatment and given, contract.
Gauteng has been rocked by numerous PPE corruption allegations. One of the latest, over 430 million rand spent to disinfect and deep clean a school.
Confident that in Gauteng we will look to a future without e-tolls. I still want to repeat that urban tolling cannot work.
Fire amid allegations that fire hydrants weren't working at the Charlotte Maxeke Hospital. Questions have emerged as to whether the health facility was compliant with various fire safety regulations and legislation. The Johannesburg Hospital has been shut down while the damage is assessed and the cause of the blaze investigated.
These some of the 143 mentally ill patients who died at unlawful NGOs. They died of hunger and dehydration after government terminated its contract with Life Esidimeni.
Was the Premier involved during the meetings?
Good morning. Abusheni, Sanbonani, Dumelang, Kuyamore, Molweni, Dumacheloni. Abusheni. You are welcome to the Real State of Gauteng address. This is addressed by our caucus leader, but also the provincial leader of the DA in Gauteng. And we welcome you wherever you are, on YouTube, on Facebook. And for those that have joined us here in Johannesburg, Bruma, we have fellow MPLs in the Gauteng legislature, some members of the Fourth Estate are here. We greet you. Also, the members of the media that are logging in via YouTube and Facebook, you are welcome to this Real State of Gauteng address by the caucus leader and the leader of the DA in Gauteng, Solly Msimanga. And he will be coming very shortly to come and address not only the people that are here, but everyone that has tuned in on what we believe is the real state of Gauteng. So, Solly, over to you.
Good morning to all of you, fellow South Africans, fellow members of the Gauteng Provincial Caucus. I want to greet also the residents of Gauteng, whom this is mainly aimed at. The people who have been lied to time and time again, year in, year out, promises made year in, year out. People who have been made to believe that the panacea lies somewhere in what the Premier says to them year in, year out, but are quickly getting to terms with the fact that these, for the last 8-9 years, have just been nothing but hollow promises. This has been nothing more than empty promises that only changes figures every year. The way our country has been operating has changed drastically over the last 2 years. Never did we think that we would be living through a pandemic in our lifetime. The COVID-19 pandemic came in silent, like a silent killer, like a thief in the night, and disrupted on our daily lives, forcing many of us to change how we go about doing our jobs and how our children are receiving a proper education. Suddenly, our economy has been plunged into disarray. A state of disaster was declared. Unexpectedly, embracing the fourth industrial revolution was the order of the day. However, this was happening at a time that Unfortunately, a lot of people then began to then lose jobs. Many of our residents in our province suddenly found themselves either being forced to take annual leave or to be without an income, as the principle of no work, no pay was enforced, where employers were unable to maintain the current wage bill without providing any goods and services. The government was the only hope to ensure that our people are protected from the pandemic through providing funds to procure life-saving resources such as the personal protection equipment and the relief grants that we were being promised. Little did we know that the same government we trusted with our livelihoods was the same government who, in fact, took advantage of our plight to steal the money and the resources meant to help the residents of Gauteng through the pandemic. Yes, we have come a long way since February 2020, when it became obvious that in many other countries around the world, we too would be affected by COVID-19. But here's the thing. Gauteng is the economic hub of the country, and indeed, one can argue that is the economic hub of Africa or the continent. But we have the highest rate of in-migration, as many South Africans, citizens, come to Gauteng to seek better opportunities, so as to provide a better life and a future for their families. One would think that the current Gauteng government, under the leadership of David Makhura, would have been able to seamlessly transition our economy into one where technology is fully utilized in all our schools across the province, where measures like social distancing in our schools could be put in place in a blink of an eye. This did not happen. And I will today talk to a number of promises that had been made by David Makhura since 2014. And we're doing this so that we want people to understand and people to prepare themselves for what is coming Monday. What is coming on Monday will be the repetition of some of the same things, and I can tell you now some of these things that will be coming up. The only difference will be the numbers that are changing here and there, a wording that will be changing here and there, but the promises are nonetheless the same. So in 2014, Premier David Makhura promised that our residents would have access to broadband and free Wi-Fi in the partnership with the private sector. This has not happened. Instead, in 2020, what we saw was a tender that hastily was awarded to Into IT Technologies to the value of 30 million rand for the provision of the GSOC security system. Officials used the COVID-19 pandemic as an excuse to not following the proper supply chain management processes. Again, in 2018, the Premier made a similar promise that by 2020, the public money would be used for the creation of the broadband infrastructure so that all residents would have access to the broadband connectivity. This didn't happen as well. Yet we have a country and an economy that is now becoming more and more reliant on technology. The pandemic has shown us that there is a gap in the market where our youth, if given proper training, if given access, will be able to start their own businesses and will embrace the fourth industrial revolution. Last year, a 24-year-old entrepreneur in Hammanskraal, Khudirakhetse Mukajane, started a delivery services using a WhatsApp. Hammanskraal is one of the many townships in the province where Uber Eats and Mr. Delivery do not operate. The young man noticed that there is a gap there that he can actually exploit and ensure that he takes an advantage of that and use modern technology to ensure that he starts a business and then make sure that the business do prosper. How many more young people out there have the urge to start something but have been hampered by government? We need more of this thing. We don't need more fancy words. We don't need more promises of TSEPO 1 million to be told that this will come into effect and hundreds of thousands of jobs will be created. Young people are saying, in spite of government, we will make things to happen. But they need to be given the opportunity. And government so far has been failing dismally to deal with it. In the latest quarterly labor force survey published by the Statistics South Africa, Gauteng's unemployment rate is standing at 37.7%, which is an increase compared to the previous quarters. In the first quarter, it was reported that 33.7% was the number. Second quarter, it was 35.4%. And now we are sitting at almost 38%. If government was serious about curbing this, we would be hearing about how the plans are put in place. Not more jargon, not changing of figures year in, year out, but we will be given the real plan and timelines of when this will be done. It is the responsibility of government to create a conducive environment for our residents to seek and find employment opportunities. We have been saying this, and we're glad that the president of the country has finally taken a leaf out of what we have been saying, and actually then said that. But what we found was a truck that was backing. We heard teet, teet, teet in the last day when he had to backtrack on what he actually said he was going to do. It then again places into the minds and into the hearts of us and so many people, are we really going to get to a point where we are really ensuring that jobs are created? It doesn't help when you're having a president saying one thing and then the ministers and his tripartite alliance members are saying, you cannot do that. And the president comes back and say, we're not going to do that. And I'm saying the president because we know that that's the same thing that the province will do as well. We know that, David Makhura will come with grand plans, will come with all sorts of promises, and then after the debate, we'll be backtracking on those because those that are in alliance with them will be pushing against that. That is the real state of the province that we find ourselves in. That is the real state of South Africa that we're finding ourselves in. No certainty in terms of policy, no certainty in terms of plan, of action, and therefore we find ourselves in limbo time and time again. In 2019, during his SOPA, Premier Makhura also indicated that e-tolls system is not working and that it will be scrapped in the Gauteng. And he says in his own words, e-tolls don't have a future in Gauteng. We are now sitting in 2022, the e-tolls are still there. In fact, there are people who are still receiving bills on a monthly basis, people who are still being threatened to be not allowed to renew their licenses. Then we're asking, what has David Makhura been doing all this time? He told us that he would ensure that the system is scrapped. In fact, we saw the ANC marching to the ANC against the ANC, trying the ANC minister to tell the ANC president to scrap e-tolls. What we said to the premier is, you can institute a dispute, an intergovernmental dispute. This is nothing new. The Western Cape has done it. But because this is a comradely thing, that they want to talk behind closed doors and find ways of making sure that taxpayers are forever burdened with unnecessary and unwanted taxes, we will also continue to have this going on. So we're still not anywhere near knowing how this issue of e-tolls is actually going to be scrapped in Gauteng. Corruption is one of the major characteristics that has also been used to describe Makhura's government and has had a huge impact on service delivery. I remember when David Makhura took office in 2014, he promised the people of Gauteng that he will deal decisively with corruption and fight corruption in all the departments and ensure that those that are implicated are indeed charged and are indeed prosecuted. It is very interesting that none of the people that had actually been implicated has actually been charged or have actually been prosecuted. In fact, David Makhura, as we speak, is sitting over a dozen of the forensic reports that we have been asking time and time again, and he has been SOPA after SOPA after SOPA, giving us a hope that in 100 days I will release these reports. In 60 days I will release that report, but so far none of these reports have seen the time of day. We'll tell you why these haven't seen the time of day. They haven't seen the time of day because some of them implicate some of the members of his own cabinet. Some of those reports are not seeing the time of day because some of his adversaries in his own cabinet are implicated by that. And once he starts dealing with them, it then becomes an issue of a political and internal political squabble. We have seen this happening in the ANC time and time again, where internal political squabbles become the hindrance in terms of delivery of services, become the hindrance in terms of the coherent running of government. How long should we wait for these reports to come to light? The promise has been made that the SIU report will be acted upon. As we speak right now, none of the officials that had been implicated in the SIU report have been made to face consequences, or have been made to face the internal disciplinary processes. In fact, some of them have been allowed to resign, pensions paid, and life goes on. And we are saying, is this what we want to see happening in this province of ours? David Makhura was in pains trying to explain why he was not personally involved, but members in his own office were involved in some of the corrupt contracts that had been highlighted. But what he has failed to tell the people so far is, what has he done? Who has he found in his office to be responsible for all the corruption that has taken place? And what is actually being done to those people? Is it going to be a case of resign, take your pension, go disappear for a while, after a little bit you will come back, we'll find a job for you somewhere else? Or is it an issue that we are now going to see a premier that really takes a stance and say, I am going to make an example. I am going to make sure that MECs who are involved in corruption are facing the charges. I am going to make sure that the officials who are involved in corruption are facing the charges. As a country, we cannot afford to have any endless number of commissions that are established to probe corruption. Something can be kept through our government properly implementing the consequence management system. They should ensure that strict adherence to the supply chain management processes and an open tender system is put in place. This is the only way in which we can ensure that only businesses who can deliver on goods and services and who meet the minimum requirements are doing business with government. Gauteng is also lagging in terms of blacklisting those who have been caught in corrupt activities. The question is, what is David Makhura doing? Chances of there being more corruption as more and more procurement continues to happen under the guise of COVID-19 pandemic, and therefore the need to then expedite some of these things will continue to happen until such time as officials and politicians see an example of wrongdoers being sentenced to jail. We will also see a significant reduction in the trend if we only see businesses being blacklisted from doing business with government if they are doing wrong or have been caught to be doing wrong, with the processes. Holding our government officials and public representatives to account is the only way in which we can ensure that the rod of corruption that runs so deep within our province or provincial government is removed. It is public money that is being looted by thieves masquerading as honorable politicians and officials who unashamedly steal our hard-earned taxes. This needs to end, and it needs to end now. Corruption cannot and should not form part of our government structure. David Makhura-led government has not yet reopened the sections of the fire-damaged, as you would see in the intro, of the Solly Msimanga Hospital, making promises that the accident and the emergency unit will be reopened last month. In January, we were told that this will happen before the end of January. We are already in February and already on the second half of January, and this hasn't happened yet. Lives are at risk as thousands of patients that have lost access to specialist services such as heart, cancer, and mental health are not able to get to seeing specialists to offer them the services that is needed. In fact, what we have seen is the reopening or money that has been wasted on the Anglo-Ashanti Hospital that now only has 3 patients in it. For years, David Makhura has said that lifestyle audits will be conducted on all government officials. This has not happened as yet, or if it has happened, the results has not been made public, as he said that these results will be made public. Under his watch, corruption has been festering in all the departments, and the cancerous plight or the cancerous growth that we have seen happening in the departments now have been becoming even emboldened because we have a premier that has planted his head firmly into the sand. But I want to take you to a few of the promises that I am sure will find again expression in David Makhura's 2022 State of the Province address. In 2014, David Makhura made this following statement, that the provincial government and municipalities will be working together with the private sector in a massive rollout of broadband and free Wi-Fi across the province as the backbone of the new economy. This hasn't happened yet. Gauteng should be able to realize 100% of internet connectivity in the next 5 years. This was his statement in 2014. This hasn't been achieved as yet. In 2014, he said, to boost the employment and economic inclusion, the provincial government and municipalities will produce 75% of all goods and services from the South African producers, especially SMMEs, township entrepreneurs, and black-owned women and youth enterprises. This hasn't been achieved as yet. He also said, working closely with state-owned enterprises, that is PRASA and Transnet, to reindustrialize our provinces and build an economic infrastructure that will boost employment creation and economic inclusion through the investment of more than 300 billion in the post, freight, and rail and pipeline capacity. I can tell you right now, this hasn't happened as yet. In fact, we have seen some of our rail infrastructure being stolen day in and day out. We have seen some of the rails being taken off and ensuring that we don't have any rails that are running between certain parts of Gauteng anymore. In 200 days, as he said, we will speed up the handing over of existing housing projects that are completed and to make sure that all houses are allocated to the legitimate owners. As part of the preventing the abuse of housing waiting lists, we will also introduce the use of biometric technology. This hasn't happened as yet. In fact, what we are seeing right now is more houses that are being hijacked. We see more projects that are actually being stopped because contractors are not being paid on time. We see more and more units that don't have the right beneficiaries in them. Instead, we are seeing thugs and we are seeing people that are not beneficiaries occupying those houses. And some of them, in certain instances, as we have heard, even when we did our listening tour, are assisted and abated by some of the government officials. This is the state of where we are. He also said that the next 5 years shall see greater efforts in harnessing ICT to deliver education in the context of e-governance and modernization of delivery of public services, the smart schools and the classroom of the future. This is something that can be said that is partially achieved. But what is worrying is that the short-sightedness in terms of the implementation of this has led to security not being in place. Some of the investment that has already been made has been lost. Some of the smart classes have already evaporated because infrastructure has been stolen. TV, smart boards, laptops, and some of these gadgets have already been stolen and taken away from the schools that they have been put in. He also says that over the next 100 days, we shall unveil a comprehensive and more integrated EPWP and CWP program that will create over 1 million jobs within the next 5 years. I can tell you right now that this hasn't happened. In fact, what we have seen is more and more job losses that has taken place in Gauteng. In 2015, he said that the Central Development Corridor is anchored around the city of Johannesburg as a hub to financial services, ICT, and pharmaceutical industries. This hasn't been been done yet. He also said that Eastern Corridor anchored around the economy of the Ekurhuleni Metro as a hub for manufacturing, logistics, and transport industries. This has also not been achieved. In the Northern Development Corridor, where he says in Tshwane there will be the hub of automotive sector, research, development, innovation, and knowledge-based economy. We have seen elements of that being achieved. But because of red tape that is always there in government, we have seen this not accelerating in a way that it should have accelerated. In the Western Corridor, he said we will encompass the economy of the current Western District and the creation of new industries, new economic nodes, and new cities, and this hasn't taken shape as yet. In the Southern Corridor, he said we will encompass the economy of the Sidibeng District and the creation of new industries, new economic nodes, and new cities. This hasn't materialized as yet. These are some of the things that he said will happen in 2015. He said also over the next 5 years, we will mobilize more than 10 billion rand in public and private investment in the generation of the Johannesburg CBD as the seat of the provincial government. This hasn't materialized as yet. He said over the next 5 years, 140,000 units will be built in Lion Park, in Diepsloot East, in Fleur Wharf, in Cosmo City, in Malibongo Ridge, and in Goudrand. 140,000 families should have benefited from housing. in these areas, and this hasn't happened as yet. Together with the Ekurhuleni Metro and national government, we are now undertaking 29 industrial initiatives under the banner of the Aerotropolis to revitalize manufacturing, aviation, transport, and logistics industries linked to the OR Tambo International Airport. This will dramatically transform the current industrial structure of the economy of Ekurhuleni. This was, again, another empty promise that nothing emerged out of it. He also said that Tambo Springs Inland Port Development will have an estimated 7.5 billion rand investment over the next 5 years. This project will create a total of 110,000 jobs over 15 years. I can tell you right now, this hasn't materialized. What is breaking my heart is when we drove around Ekurhuleni, we were told that 500 million will be invested into the BRT system and ensuring that the people of Ekurhuleni have a public transport system that is modernized, that is able to transport people cost effectively, but also able to connect people from city to city. This project has not really materialized. In fact, what we have is a derelict building that is now being vandalized on a day-to-day basis. In fact, what we have is a ticket system bus that is standing next to a building that should have been occupied, and tickets are being bought and sold out of a bus on the side of the road instead of a building that was built and was supposed to be housing the Ekurhuleni bus rapid transport system. He also said that more than 100,000 housing units will be delivered over the next 5 years in areas such as Chief Albert Lutuli, John Dube Extension 2, Tsakane Extension 22, Jamestown South, Leofort, Rietfontein, and Clayville Extension 45. This hasn't taken place. It reminds me of what the president said when he visited, before 2019 elections, when he visited Alexander and made a promise of 1 million houses to the people of Alexander. Not a single brick has been laid ever since that promise has been made. Now we're raising these things to then highlight what is the true state of the province and what is the true state of the nation. Because we want people to listen come Monday and ask, are these things really happening that we are being promised, or is there more and more promises that will amount to nothing and more promises in a year's time? He said that 500 million in the capex of the development of the airport, with over 10 billion rand expected to be invested in Lanseria over the next 15 years. Here, Shem, we can give him some points because a part of that has actually been achieved. So we can go on and on about what he said. But here's some of the things that I think are very much interesting. So in 2016, he said that I would like to report that we have reduced the time taken to approve the environmental impact assessments from 18 to 24 months down to 3 months. We are confident that we will reach our target of approving the reports and application within 30 days. In fact, this has now become worse. There are investors that want to come, there are developers that want to come, but they cannot get the environmental impact assessments done and certificate issues on time, and they are looking elsewhere outside of Gauteng to invest their money instead of investing here in Gauteng and creating the employment that is needed here in Gauteng. He said that the Katlehong, Soweto, and Kagiso Township industrial hubs will be accredited and open for businesses before the end of the 2016-2017 financial year. We still have more and more young people in Katlehong, in Soweto, in Kagiso, in Atteridgeville, in other centers that are languishing in a life of drugs because opportunities are still not being given to them. He also said that in response to the growing demand of the Gauteng services, we are going to be adding 48 new trains to the fleet at a cost of 3.5 billion rand, underwritten by the Development Bank of Southern Africa. This investment, as he said, will create more than 9,000 jobs. In fact, we have seen more and more jobs being lost instead of being created there. He made also the call that we will ensure that the e-tolls will be scrapped. And in fact, that he's looking forward to the recommendation of the commission that is put in place will actually then be driven to a point where the e-tolls will be scrapped. Up to today, millions of rands later after the commission was established, we still know anywhere nearer to achieving the scrapping of e-tolls. He also said in 2018 that the Gauteng provincial government has invested public money in the creation of the broadband infrastructure. Now, you must also notice how this issue of broadband keeps coming in time and time again. Every year we hear the same thing, but very little gets to be achieved in that. He also spoke about the current Gauteng provincial government spending 23% of the goods and services budget on women-owned businesses. They like screaming, watinta umbokoto, watinta mafazi, watinta umbokoto, rising of the women. But when it comes to really putting their money where their mouth is, this hasn't been happening yet. He said that they would like to achieve a target of 30% by the end of 2019. This, up to 2022, hasn't really been achieved as yet. But I want to then leave some of these promises that he said that he will be able to then achieve and go to the core of where the problem is. David Makhura promised that they will place 250,000 young people in long-term jobs in various growth sectors of the economy, in partnership with Harambee Youth Employment Accelerator and the Youth Empowerment Services. This has not happened. In fact, we find that of the 37.7% of the people that find themselves being unemployed, more than 60% of those are young people. Gauteng has the highest number of unemployed young people living in it. This cannot continue to happen. We are sitting on a time bomb if we are not going to be addressing the issue of upskilling and offering opportunities to young people. We'll find ourselves where young people will revolt against this government. What we saw last year during the July uprising will look like a child's play when the young people stand up and say enough is enough. They are tired of games, they are tired of promises, they want to see some of the real change that they've been promised for years and years on end. But I want to then break it down to a number of departments right now and see what we have seen and maybe offer some solutions to that. In the Department of Social Development, 12 buildings have been given to the Western Cape and to Gauteng Department of Social Development by the Department of Infrastructure. The Western Cape has actually then begun the process of using those buildings to ensure that we are able to house some of the homeless people. We are able to create shelter that is able to assist and restore some dignity of our people. In Gauteng, 0 of these buildings have been used as yet. So you're sitting with resources that are not being used, and then we are surprised why we are seeing more and more people languishing in the streets while government is supposed to be doing what it's supposed to be doing, but it's not doing that. We are seeing an under-expenditure in the Department of Social Development of 1.3 billion rand. Now, I think COVID has really caught government with its pens down here. What we have seen being exposed is a government that has not only failed to plan, but has also failed to implement. 1.3 billion rand when it comes to a social relief and social assistance in a province like Gauteng, where so much is needed, where food parcels and families are going on without any means to provide for themselves. And yet you have a department that returns 1.3 billion rand because it couldn't spend it. Right now, more and more people are becoming unemployed. More and more people go to bed hungry. And the department cannot go on without spending its money. The president, through the ECDP stimulus package, gave Gauteng Department of Social Development money for it to assist with the ECD development. That money hasn't been spent. Not a cent of it has been spent. Yet we have a lot of our ECDs that are struggling in informal settlements. If you go to Olivenhout-Bosch, if you go to Diepsloot, if you go to Tembisa, you'll see how ECDs are actually struggling to make ends meet. Yet the Department of Social Development is sitting on money that they're not able to then spend. They have also become a delinquent department. I mean, if you go to the Department of Social Development and find out how many of the NGOs have actually been complaining, NGOs who have seen a gap where government has been failing to do what it's supposed to be doing and said, we are putting our hands up, we will assist government. Government has actually failed the same NGOs by not paying them on time. The Department of Social Development has become a delinquent department in terms of paying these people on time. In fact, what has happened is that the NGOs that have raised a concern of actually complained have now been victimized and in actual sense now been worked out of the system so that they don't get any of the grants going forward. This is something that cannot continue to happen in Gauteng. What we want is to make sure that there is a service level agreement between the NGOs and the Department of Social Development, and that the Department of Social Development pays on time what they're supposed to be paying for, and the NGOs do what needs to be done on time. In terms of the public safety, we've seen that 1,169 police vehicles are out of service at this point in time. Now, the president talks about how we need to make sure that our infrastructure is guarded, how we need to make sure that we chase after criminals and drive the crime stats low. How are we supposed to do that when you don't have resources that must be allocated to the policemen and women to do what they're supposed to be doing? An embarrassment is to go to a police station in Garankuwa that had been without electricity for 6 months. Now, this is a police station that has been provided electricity directly by Eskom. They have been sitting for 6 months without electricity in that particular police station. And if you go at night, you'll find that police men and women are then using their cell phone torches to then try and assist members of the public. This is the real state of Gauteng province. This is where we find ourselves, yet you hear promises being made year in, year out. Premier talking about how they will employ more policemen and women, how they will ensure that there's 10 additional police per ward that will be employed. Yet at the same time, they're failing to do the very, very basics. They failed to even provide a generator to a police station for 6 months. And after pressure from the DA, that police station this week has managed to then get some connectivity back to it. And now they are able to then run on full service again. What is very sad is that we're talking about a pandemic of gender-based violence that has crippled our country. Yet in Gauteng, you have less and less social workers that are employed or that are working in our police stations. In our trauma, what we call the trauma unit in our police stations. In fact, what we found is that sometimes one social worker is responsible for a number of police stations in a particular cluster. And in fact, these social workers only work during the day. So if somebody comes in and reports in the middle of the night, there wouldn't be anybody to come and assist. That is the state of where we find ourselves in. How are we not employing more and more to ensure that places like Diepsloot, Dobsonville, Hillbrow, don't have to share a social worker, but will have a social worker that is there to deal with the issue of rape, the issue of child abuse, and any other of those issues that are being brought to the police when it needs to happen. Again, the Premier promised us that there will be 400 traffic officers that would be employed. That has also become a pipe dream. The police, as we stand in Gauteng, there's one police to more than 570 people. That is not sustainable. That is not in any way close to the international standards. We keep promised again that this will be dealt with. In fact, the budgets keep being cut year in and year out. And we are surprised why we're sitting with the pandemic and the problem that we're sitting with. The Department of Infrastructure Development, this is one delinquent department that the DA proposes that it should be scrapped. The department is as useless as anything else because A, they fail to spend money that is allocated to them. B, they fail to meet the standards in terms of the buildings that they're supposed to be building and actually maintaining. We propose that this department be dissolved and the functions be taken back to the departments themselves so that the departments are able to then do the bidding themselves and are able to ensure that the specifications of the buildings and the requirements are actually met. We have not seen, as an example, a single cent spent on the Charlotte Makhura. This, again, all we've seen, and the Premier will be talking to this, only the Solidarity Fund has actually been used there. So the question is, where is the DID in all of this? While you have an external then a body that is doing what they are supposed to be doing. We have seen, again, as we have heard from hospital management, the disconnect between themselves as the department and also the DID, where some of the work that is actually required by hospitals is not the work that is delivered by the Department of Infrastructure Development. As I said earlier on, you're also sitting with Anglo Ashanti that was built with close on 500 million and is actually right now only occupied by 3 patients. In human settlements, the lie that is continuously perpetuated is that we are going to build millions and millions of houses. But in reality, Gauteng has got a 1.1 million rand housing backlog, and it continuously grows as immigration into Gauteng continues to take place. The best of years, you only have 30,000 units being built in Gauteng. So that tells you that we are not able to meet the demand of housing in Gauteng. Then you hear the Premier talking about the land release program, the rapid land release program. But you cannot release land to people if you're not able to provide bulk infrastructure on that. What the Premier and the MECs and the ministers not telling people is that Eskom is said and Rainwater has said that you cannot develop any further, or you cannot put any further infrastructure because you are putting strain on whatever infrastructure is already out there. So Eskom has said you cannot build or you cannot provide new development with electricity. Rainwater is saying we cannot build new reservoirs because we cannot pump water that way. And yet we hear of a plan to ensure that there's more and more people that are given land. Are we just going to be giving people land? Are we going to talk about formalizing of informal settlements, yet knowing very, very well that this is not going to take place, given the fact that the infrastructure that is already there doesn't allow for further development to be taking place? We have heard of hostels that were going to be converted into family units. You can go to Dube, you can go to Alexander, you can go to Beckersdal, you can go to Setokwa, as some of the hostels, including Winterfeld, where we were told that some of these hospitals will be converted into family units. In fact, what you hear year in, year out is millions and millions that are spent. But if you go and look at the appalling condition in which our people find themselves living in, is not the way to go. And this is just not right. And there's no consequence management in that as well. I spoke about the formalizing of informal settlements, and this is something that I'm sure the Premier will be talking on again. But the truth and the reality is that this is not going to be happening. We need to make sure that the Premier puts pressure on the National Department to ensure that we are able to put infrastructure in place to support municipalities for them to be able to distribute this infrastructure. And then you can talk about how you then do land redistribution in that way. The Premier year in, year out talks about mega projects. But these mega projects are now marred with corruption, are marred with subcontractors that are fighting amongst each other or not even awarded contracts on time. So this, again, you will hear of this corridor, that corridor, mega project there, but these are things that are just not taking off the ground. This is what has marred Premier Makhura's tenure in office. In the Department of Education, we are saying that we need to review the online application system for grade 1 and 8 more specifically, to ensure that it guarantees the parental choice. Parents now are really under pressure because the applications get to be approved very, very late, and they get to be communicated very, very late. Sometimes while the schooling curriculum has already started, which means that parents now have to plan to have their children transported. They have to go buy new uniforms, and this put financial and other pressures on parents who wait months and months to hear an answer from the Department of Education, and yet the answer doesn't come. So we are saying we need to make sure that there is a proper review of the system and ensure that parents are guaranteed placement where they prefer to be placed. The department is also need to ensure that it employs more teachers. They have returned 1.3 billion rand, which is actually money that was supposed to ensure that funded vacancies are actually then filled. We're now running short, and this is why you have had a situation where classes have been overloaded or overcrowded because teachers are not being employed. So it doesn't help that Panyaza Lesufi talks about building more schools, but we are not employing more teachers to make sure that they occupy those schools. This is something that needs to change and needs to change very, very fast. We are talking about full contact learning that needs to resume, or is actually resumed right now. But we're not talking about the challenges that are facing our schools, and this is something that needs to be dealt with speedily. I've said that the Department of Infrastructure Development needs to be disbanded. And we need to make sure that the Department of Education gets that allocation and gets to then decide where schools are to be built, the kind of maintenance needs to take place. And we need to make sure that schools like Maibuye Primary School in Ivory Park, which doesn't comply with the standards, and the municipal approvals hadn't been given for the school to be built through the DID, gets to stop. Schools like Noktula Special School that was built worth 300 million rand, which is now not, which is non-compliant, that has now been built again by the Department of Infrastructure Development, is not fully occupied. So you see, the issue is not the lack of money from time to time. The issue is how we plan and how we execute. And this is why we're saying we need to cut some of these unnecessary departments and empower the departments that are there, make sure that there's project managers that are responsible for some of these projects, and ensure that people are held to account for each and every cent that is being put in place. There are projects that have been incomplete and haven't been so for more than a year. Issues of subcontracting and subcontractors not being paid on time, issues of contractors not being appointed on time becomes an issue. A school like Bramfisher Primary School in Bramfisher, Nancy Field Primary School in Eldorado Park, Simpeto Secondary School in Soshanguve. These are schools that are supposed to have been completed. While we're now talking about immigration, but yet we are not able to use infrastructure that is there to ensure that we are able to lessen the burden that is created. This is another reason why we're saying the Department of Infrastructure Development needs to be disbanded. The Department of Transport, we have said that we do not in Gauteng build new roads. We haven't been building new roads, and we haven't been expanding on existing roads, which means that in a number of years, Gauteng will face a gridlock future. We will have a future where there's more cars and less vehicles, or there will be more cars, and less roads for these vehicles to be traveling on. This is something that we need to make sure that we curb. How do we do that? We have been saying we need to invest more in public transport. We need to make sure that the power is devolved from the national to province, and province is able to then take its section of PRASA infrastructure and ensure that our railroad system is actually working as it's supposed to be working. The grants that is actually awarded to the busing company systems is actually to ensure that the buses that we use, or the public that is using, are of great standard and are actually able to then transport more and more of our people, to lessen the need for private cars to be on the roads and ensure that you have more and more public transport, reliable, safe public transport to be on the road. We have a massive rail infrastructure, but we want to make sure that there is power devolved from national to province. Fikile Mbalula is not going to be able to meet all the needs, that especially here in Gauteng. We need to make sure that in Gauteng, that power gets to be devolved here. We can plan around how we fix that infrastructure, how we invest into that infrastructure, and how we guard that infrastructure to make sure that it works for the people. In economic development, we are saying Gauteng is losing on 93 jobs every hour, every day. Now think about it, 93 jobs every hour, every day. Somebody was saying to me, you can declare that poverty has indeed migrated to Gauteng. A province that is supposed to be a province of opportunities, a province that is supposed to be giving its residents hope for the rest of the country, is on its knees when it comes to the economic development. We're having a department or sub-department called the Gauteng Enterprise Propeller that is still sitting on over 250 million rand that is supposed to be money that is supposed to be going to small business enterprises across the province in stimulating and getting the small businesses going. But this has not happened. We're still sitting with that money. Like I said earlier on, sometimes the problem in government is not the problem of money, it's the problem of implementation, the problem of planning and execution. we need to make sure that gets to be addressed as a matter of urgency. We have the Gauteng Growth Development Agency that continues to have funding that goes towards administration, but very little to show in terms of what investments we are attracting, both from a local and an international perspective. So how are we going to then ensure that we turn around the fortunes of the 37.7% of the unemployed people that find themselves without here in Gauteng, if the agencies and the people that are entrusted to ensure that these work opportunities are created, investment is actually derived into this province? We want to then say to Premier Makhura, this is part of what the real state of the province address, or the real state of the province is. We want to hear what lies you're going to tell the people of Gauteng. We want to hear what else you are going to be making as promises, what numbers you're going to tweak so that it suits your latest dream boat that you want the people of Gauteng to get into. You've promised us that there will be a lifestyle audit to the executive. We're still waiting for that report. You've told us that the reports, that the forensic report will be released. We're still waiting for that. You are supposed to be part of the State of the Nation address and give a Gauteng perspective. You went absent without action. Is this what Gauteng deserves? I don't think that Gauteng deserves that. Gauteng deserves a government that will work for it. It deserves a premier that will be at the forefront of the issues, addressing the issues. Gauteng deserves a premier and leadership that will stand against corruption. Gauteng deserves leadership that will ensure that people are at the center of each and everything that they are doing. The residents of Gauteng do not have the fear of trusting the DA, and we will make sure that we continue to hold this government to account. We will continue to make sure that all the promises that they are making will be exposed, and we will also inform the residents of Gauteng of more lies as they come in, and really inform the residents of Gauteng about the real state of the province. So I want to say thank you very much for joining us this morning. I will allow questions to members of the press who are sitting, maybe joining in online, or who are here with us today to ask questions. I do have my whole cabinet that is here with me, as we will also be addressing the issues of the real state of the province address. But in closing, I want to say there's an old saying that goes that a fish rots from the head. The litany of broken promises shown by David Makhura is of being incapable and of not fit to govern is growing in evidence. He will mark this history of the end of the ANC's administration in Gauteng come 2024. And he will be remembered as a premier that had a lot of promises but disappeared towards the end of his term instead of addressing the real issues facing the people of Gauteng. Thank you very much.
Thanks very much, Solly. We'll now be taking questions. If there are questions from either members of the media that are here or those that are logged on via YouTube or Facebook. Questions? Do you have questions online? In the absence of the questions, I want to thank each one of you for coming, and for everyone who tuned in to all our online platforms. Thank you very much. And the address of the state of Gauteng concludes. Thanks very much and have a great day. Thank you.